Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel and welcome back. In this one, we'll go over something a bit different than usual and also something a bit more complex when it comes to building SaaS web applications. So, more specifically, in this guide, we'll go over how to build a third-party SaaS integration with a Go API. And as it says here, the goal is to integrate with third-party apps like, for example, ActiveCampaign, ConvertKit, Keep, GetResponse, or others. Now, if you're not familiar with these apps, these are basically apps that usually store tags for context, and we want to be able to fetch those tags for integrations that we have inside a SaaS web application to display them to users and possibly further add functionality to the SaaS web application. So, in other words, we essentially want to be able to integrate with these applications when we are building our own SaaS web applications. So one example that I can give you is that, for example, if you're building a landing page, a SaaS web application, so a web application that is able to, for example, build a landing page using drag and drop functionality, then when someone submits a contact form inside of a landing page, you might want to, for example, send that person to a particular CRM with a particular tag, for example, and you might want to display a list of tags that is available inside that particular CRM so that then the user of your own SaaS application can pick from the list of tags, and then your web application is going to take care of, when the submission is done, sending that or applying, in other words, that tag to a particular contact. So with this in mind, this will also be a great opportunity to learn about Go's interfaces and how to use them and how to think about structuring this type of functionality in a SaaS web application. But before we continue, if you want to learn more in depth how to build a SaaS web application from scratch using HTMX and Go and get one-on-one help when doing it, click the link below to join the HTMX Go SaaS Blueprint, a complete A to Z course on how to build and launch a SaaS web application using HTMX, Go, PostgreSQL, Tailwind CSS, and other technologies. I'm still building the course, so if you want to get notified and get free access to exclusive videos before they are released, go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below and sign up there. So the first section will be about creating a dump version with data from the environment variables, and only in the second section we'll create a smart version with arbitrary field values stored in a PostgreSQL database for each app, since some apps need specific data to integrate with their API. So what I mean by this is that, for example, ActiveCampaign, when we want to hit the ActiveCampaign's API, we need a particular URL that is given to us for each one of the accounts that we have with ActiveCampaign. So for example, if you now go ahead and create a new ActiveCampaign account or create a free trial account or a paid one, in both of those cases you're going to get an API URL, but in the case of ConvertKit, for example, we need to hit the generic API, so the API that everyone who has an account needs to hit, and then based on the API key or the API secret, then we get different data back. So both of these applications have their own structure when it comes to hitting their APIs, and because of that we need to take that into account, and we need to be able to build our application with that in mind. And because of that, first of all, we'll create again a dump version that will be using the data by getting it from the environment variables, and only later we'll be creating the smart version with those quote-unquote arbitrary field values that will allow us to essentially have different integrations that the user can add different values to it, and then we can set those fields and those values accordingly. And the cool thing about using this structure is that it will make it very easy for us in the future to add additional integrations if we want to this project. So the first step for us is to set up the Go project. So let's start with initializing a Go project. So to be able to do that, we need to run this command. So it is going to be go mod init. So let's copy this, and then inside our terminal and inside a project directory, so make sure that you create a new and empty directory. Let's actually first of all run here git init, and then after this let's paste this command, and now let's run it. So we now have a new file inside of this directory, which is go.mod. Now the next step is for us to add the contents below to the entry point of our project to make sure that this is all working. So let's open here our code editor, and inside of it let's create a new main.go file, and inside of this file let's paste this code snippet. So now as you can see, when we run this Go program, we print here a message to the console, which is going to be hello world. So now let's move here to a different pane, and let's run this Go program to make sure that this is all working. So as you can see, we get this hello world message back, which means that we correctly set up the Go project. Now the next step is for us to set routing. So as it says here, now since we want to build an API, we need to add routing to our Go program. So to accomplish this, we'll use the she package, which is a router that's simple to use and integrates very well with the Go's standard library, which makes it easy to use, since if you already know the Go standard library when it comes to making HTTP requests, then the she router package is going to be very familiar for you. And it also means that it is easy to integrate with different packages that integrate also with the Go standard library, and we don't need to create any kind of bridge when we want to integrate those packages with the she router package. So to install it, to set up the routing, we need to first of all install the package. So let's copy here this command, which is going to be go get and dash, then we need to pass here this flag, which is going to be -u, and after that we need to pass the URL to this package. So let's copy this, and then inside our project directory let's paste this command and let's run this. Now let's set up the router and return a simple hello world message when we make a get request to the base path of our web server. So as you can see here, we want to do a very basic setup. So we want to first of all initialize a new router with the new router method. Then we want to add a middleware to log all of the requests to the console. And then when we hit here the base path of our server with the get method, then we return a very simple hello world message, and then we want to listen and serve on port 8080 on localhost. So let's copy this code snippet, and then inside of the terminal let's paste this here and replace the contents of this file with the snippet that we've just copied. Now let's move back to our code snippet, and if you want access to it, don't worry, I'll leave a link in the description down below so you can access this entire guide and also all of these code snippets. But now inside of the code snippets, as you can see, the next step is, since we'll be using the air package to run our Go program, which enables us to have live reloading when building our project, we want to ignore the directory that it outputs to, which is going to be this temp directory, and we want to add it to a newly created .gitignore file. So let's copy this, and then inside our code editor let's add a new file here, which is going to be .gitignore, and let's add this here. And now inside this pane let's run the air command to make sure that our server starts running, and again we'll have live reloading, which means that if we make any kind of changes to our code, then this goes ahead and rebuilds the entire project without us having to stop and then restart our server over and over again. So with this in mind, now let's move here to a new pane, and the next step is going to be for us to, as it says here, first of all start our server, and then we want to give this a try by making a request to localhost and then port 8080. So let's copy this, and then inside of our terminal let's run this command, and as you can see it says here hello world, which means that at this point everything is working correctly when it comes to the routing and also to the server, and we've also correctly went ahead and set up the whole project. So it means again that everything is working correctly up to this point. Now let's get started with building the initial quote-unquote dumb integration, and we first want to create a new integration directory and a new integration.wo file within it with the package name also integration. So let's move back to our code editor and let's do exactly that. So let's type here integration and then integration.go, and inside of this file let's define the package name as also integration. So now let's move back to our code snippets. And the next step is for us to add, first of all, a tag struct with a data structure for a particular tag that is going to come from each one of our applications API, and then a new interface which holds all of the methods that we'll be using to interact with a quote-unquote app. And again, keep in mind that this concept of an app inside of this project means, for example, an ActiveCampaign app or a ConvertKit app, which are going to be the apps that are going to return the tags when we hit their APIs. So as you can see, we first of all want to set here this tag struct, which is going to have an ID and also a name. And then we want to create the app interface, which is going to have a few different methods, and we'll take a look at it in just a second. So first, let's copy this code snippet and let's paste this inside of the integration.go file. And now let's go line by line and take a look at exactly what these methods do. So first we have this one, which is authenticate, and this is going to take a request, which is a pointer to http.Request. And this method is the method to set the headers and or the query params to authenticate requests to the app endpoints. Now what this essentially means is that inside of this method we are going to pass this http.Request, and then we want to modify the query params or the headers depending on the application, so that when we make a request to the application's API, then we are going to be correctly authenticated. Now, one important thing to keep in mind is that some applications are going to be authenticated, so their APIs are going to be authenticated by using the headers, and other ones are going to be authenticated by using the query params. But again, each one of those applications are going to take care of that inside of the structs when we implement this method. But here the interface only describes what's going to happen when it comes to the method. Then we also have this one, which is URL, which doesn't take any argument and returns a string. So this is the method to get the app URL, which has to be set on a struct that implements the interface on initialization. So when we initialize a new struct, which is going to have all of the data about a particular integration, inside of that struct we're going to set the app URL. Now this app URL can either come from, let's say, an environment variable or from the database, or it can be a static URL, but it doesn't really matter at this point. What we want to keep in mind is that again this simply describes what we want to do when it comes to the interface, which is to return a string, which is the quote-unquote base URL for a particular app. Then the next method that we have inside of this interface is this one, which is getTagsPath, and this is the method to get the app's tags path, which varies from app to app. Now in this case we might in the future want to implement more functionality when it comes to these applications. So in this case we have here a method that gets the base URL, and then we also have a method that gets only the path to be able to get the list of tags from a particular app API. And then the next method is going to be unmarshal tags, and this is going to take here a slice of bytes, and then it is going to return a slice of tag, so of type tag struct, and then it is also going to return a possible error. So as it says here, this is a method to unmarshal tags from response coming from the app's API into a slice of tag struct. So what this essentially means is that we are going to get a response from the API, and that response is going to come in many different shapes. So for example, ConvertKit is going to return a certain shaped API or a JSON response with a certain shape, and then ActiveCampaign is going to return a different shape when it comes to the JSON that it returns from the API when we want to get a list of tags, and we want to be able to essentially parse that response that we get from the API and then put it into a structure that we want to have inside of our application, regardless of the app that we are interacting with. So in other words, we want to put this into a slice of type tag struct, which is going to be this. So it doesn't really matter what the key name is going to be or what the type, for example, of the ID is going to be. We want always to arrive at this point where we have a list of this tag struct, which is going to have the ID and also the name. Now, the next step is for us to create a function to initialize one of our apps, which is going to be, in this case, ActiveCampaign. So let's first of all create a new file, which we'll call activecampaign.go. So let's type here ActiveCampaign and then .go. And inside of this file, we want to add the following contents, which are going to be, first of all, this integration struct, which, as it says here, is called ActiveCampaignIntegration struct. And this is going to hold, first of all, the API key, then the API URL, and finally the tags path, which, like we mentioned previously, we want to have this string essentially to be able to know what the path is when we want to hit this API and get a list of tags. And then we have this function which will allow us to initialize this struct. So we follow the following rule, which is going to essentially be adding new before the name of the struct, and then we return a pointer to the particular struct. So it says here new ActiveCampaignIntegration, and then this returns a pointer to ActiveCampaignIntegration, and we do that by using the following code. So we want to add here this ampersand, and then we want to add the following data here. So first of all, we have the API URL, which we are going to grab from the environment variables. So to do this, we want to use this OS package and then the getEnv method. We do the exact same thing for the API key, and then this is going to be static. So we want to type here the tags path, which is going to be /API/free, which is the version of their API, and then /tags. And again, keep in mind that the reason that this is a quote-unquote dumb integration is because the integration credentials with the third party are stored in the environment variables, so we don't yet have access to a database that stores those values. Now, the next step is for us to implement all the interface methods on this ActiveCampaignIntegration struct, and we'll start with the URL method. So let's copy this code snippet, and inside of this file, let's paste this after this struct that we defined here. And as you can see, this is pretty simple. So this is a receiver method, which means that we append quote-unquote this method to this struct, and then we do the following. We want to return here the string, and then in order to be able to return the correct API URL, we type here integration.API URL, and it is going to return this value that we pass here when we initialize this struct. Now, one thing that's cool about Go is that later when we want to pass this struct into a function that takes an app interface, so if we take a look here at this file, we have this app interface. Then if we implement all of the methods that are here inside of this interface, then Go is going to accept this ActiveCampaignIntegration struct, for example, as a value into that function, even if we define the argument as this interface. And that's because if this struct implements all of the methods, then Go is going to assume that it implements the interface in its totality, quote unquote. So That's a really cool thing about Go, and that makes it very easy for us to understand our code and also to structure this entire thing, because we don't need in this case to explicitly say here that we want to implement this interface. So in other languages, let's say like for example PHP or even Rust, we would need to explicitly say that a particular struct wants to implement a particular interface, or in the case of Rust it would be a particular trait. But again, in this case we don't have to do that, so keep that in mind. That also makes it a bit more complex at first to understand, since we don't have here something that explicitly says that we are implementing this, but it also makes it a lot easier for us to, after wrapping our heads around it, to reason about all of this logic when it comes to building our web applications. Now, the next step is for us to implement the authenticate method, and these methods, keep in mind that this method mutates the pointer to the http.Request to either add a new query param or a header to the request. So in the case of ActiveCampaign, it adds a new API-token header with the value from the integration struct. So as you can see here, we have the authenticate method. This takes here the request, which is a pointer to http.Request, and it doesn't return anything. And again, that's because it is going to mutate the original request with the stuff that we pass here. So let's copy this code snippet and let's paste it after this, and let's save so that this imports here the HTTP package. And as you can see, we say here request.header and then .add. Then we need to pass the key of this header, which is going to be API token, and then the API key, which is going to come from this ActiveCampaignIntegration struct. So we say here integration.api key. Now the next step is for us to implement the getTagsPath method, which returns the tags path that we set up when initializing the integration struct. And one thing that's important to keep in mind is that the tags path is always going to be static. So for example, if we had an application that had multiple integrations with ActiveCampaign or with multiple ActiveCampaign accounts, then we would need to have the ability to have multiple API URLs and multiple API keys. Now we're going to be setting up that when we do the integration with the database, but in the case of the tags path, it is going to be static regardless of the integration. So let's move back the code snippets and let's copy this, and then inside of the file let's paste this after the authenticate method. So as you can see, this is also pretty simple. So we have here getTagsPath, and this returns a string, and then we say here integration.tagsPath. Now the next step is for us to implement the earnMarshall tags, which again is going to take a slice of bytes, and it is going to return a slice of tags and a possible error. And this transforms the data we get from the ActiveCampaign's API into, again, a slice of tag struct. So let's copy this code snippet and let's paste this in here. Let's also move here this type to the top. So let's add this after this. And now let's take a look at everything that's happening here. So again, we have here the method name. And inside of this method, we want to do the following. First of all, we want to initialize here the ActiveCampaign tags, which is going to be this type that we've just added. And as you can see, we have this key, which is going to be tags. And then this is going to be a slice of structs, which are going to have the following keys. First of all, it is going to have the ID field, and then it is also going to have the tag field. So this is essentially going to be the structure that is going to come from the ActiveCampaign's API. So if we take a look here at their API documentation, as you can see, if we hit this endpoint, which is going to be API/free/tag, then we get this JSON response back, which is going to have this key, which is the tags. So we have here this JSON tag set, and then each one of these objects inside of this array are going to have multiple values, or in this case multiple keys and values, but we are only interested in two of them, which is going to be first of all the ID. So we have here also the JSON tag set as ID, and this is of type string, and then this is also going to return the name of a particular tag, and the key is going to be tag instead of name or title, for example. So we want to set that accordingly also inside of the struct. So we have here the tag here set, and also the field as tag, and this is also of type string. Then after initializing this struct, we want to unmarshal it into this struct that we've initialized, and we want to pass this as the data. So we type here json.unmarshal, then the first one, so the first argument is going to be data, which as you can see is a slice of bytes, and then we have here the destination that we want to unmarshal this into. So we pass here the reference to this struct that we've just initialized. Then we want to check to see if there's an error. So if we have an error, we want to return an empty slice of type tag, and then we want to also return the error, and if not, we want to do the following. Here at this point we want to initialize here a slice of type tag, and then we want to range through all of the tags that we get from the ActiveCampaigns API. So we do here 4, then we want to ignore the key, we only are interested here in the value, which is tag. Then we want to range through ActiveCampaign tags, and each one of these are going to give us here the tag and also the ID. So we want to append this to our tag struct that we've initialized here. So we say here tags equal append, and then we pass the tags, and then the value is going to be, as you can see here, we want to initialize a new tag, and we want to pass first of all the ID, which has in this case the same field name, so it is also ID, and then we also want to set here the name, which is going to be tag.tag. And then after ranging through all of the tags that we get from the API, then we want to return the struct, and also at this point we want to return the error as nil. And now, as it says here inside our guide, we now should have the result below, which is the entirety of the file that we've just created. So if you want to go over this again, I'm going to leave a link down in the description below, so you can access this entire guide and also all of the code snippets, and you can confirm if your code snippets or if the code that you're working inside of your local machine matches everything that we are doing. And this also makes it easier for you to simply copy the examples and then paste them inside of your local machine. But before we continue, if you want to learn more in depth how to build a SaaS web application from scratch using HTMX and Go, and get one-on-one help when doing it, click the link below to join the HTMX Go SaaS Blueprint, a complete A to Z course on how to build and launch a SaaS web application using HTMX, Go, PostgreSQL, Tailwind CSS, and other technologies. I'm still building the course, so if you want to get notified and get free access to exclusive videos before they are released, go to webdevfuel.com/HGSB or click the link in the description down below and sign up there. So now the next step is for us to do the exact same thing, but for the ConvertKit app, with the contents below in a convertkit.go file within the integration directory. So let's copy this code snippet and let's create here a new file which we'll call convertkit.go, and let's paste this inside of it. And now, as you can see, this is actually pretty similar to the previous example, so we're just going to go over it a little bit quicker than with the previous example with ActiveCampaign. So as you can see, in this case we have also here a struct. In this case it is ConvertKitIntegration. Then here we have the API key and also an API secret. Then we have also the API URL, and finally the tags path. Then we have here the response that is going to come from the ConvertKit API when we want to get the list of tags. In this case, we also have this tags key, and then this is going to be an array, and inside of it we're going to have objects, and these objects are going to have the following keys. We'll also have here the ID. Now in this case the ID is going to be an integer, so we're going to pass here the type as int32, and then we have the name of the tag, which in this case the key is going to actually be name, and it is also a string. Then in the case of this method we do the exact same thing. We want to return the API URL. Now in the case of the authenticate method, it is a bit different than with the previous case. So as you can see here, we first of all want to get this query, so this is going to be of type url.values from our request. So we type here request.url.query. So we want to call the query method, and then this is going to return again to us this url.values, and then we want to set the API key to be the value that we get from the integration. So we pass here integration.API key, and only after setting this value we want to override the raw query that we have inside of the URL by doing the following. We want to type here request.url and then raw query, and this is going to equal query.encode. So what we essentially want to do is we want to grab the query that we have here at this point inside of the URL, then we want to add to it a new value, and then we want to override it by encoding the new queries that we have within this, so the new queries that we have at this point in our code. Then we also want to pass here the getTagsPath method, so this is going to be the exact same thing as in the case of the ActiveCampaign example. And then we have here the unmarshal tags. So as you can see, this is also pretty similar. We want to initialize the struct, then we want to unmarshal. After that we want to range over each one of the tags that we get from the API, and in this case we want to pass here the tag.name. And in the case of the ID, since we want to make sure that the ID is going to be a string, instead of directly passing the ID that we get from ConvertKit, as you can see this would be an int32, we want to transform this into a string by using the format package and then printf method, and we pass in here this %d, and then the second argument has to be an integer, so then it transforms this into a string with the contents being the ID that we actually get from the API. And then after doing all of the same stuff that we did in the previous case, then we want to return the tags and also the error as nil. And also, as you can see, this method which initializes the integration struct, we have this down here, so it says new ConvertKit integration, and this returns the pointer to the ConvertKit integration struct. And here we want to do the following. First of all, we want to pass the ConvertKit API key, which, keep in mind again, we at this point are getting this from the environment variables. Later we'll set up the database integration to be able to have multiple integrations for a single application, so for example integrating with multiple ConvertKit accounts. Then we also want to get, in this case, the API secret. So like I said previously, each one of these applications has their own methods of authenticated the request to the API, and in the case of ConvertKit, for certain requests to the API, we are going to be needing this API secret. Now in this case of the tags, we only are interested in the API key, but to make this easier to modify in the future if you want to, we've also added this here, which is the API secret. Then we also have the API URL, which in this case is going to be static. And then we also have the tags path, which is going to be /v3/tags. So now let's move back to the code snippets, and as it says here, we've now successfully set up both integrations. So to ensure all of this works, let's set the environment variables for both apps or other apps if you want to use this as an example only. Now in this case I'm going to go ahead and do this and come back in just a second, since I don't want to expose these keys from both the ConvertKit application and also from the ActiveCampaign application. Now, after setting the environment variables, the next step is for us to create a simple function to initialize a new pointer to http.Request with a method and URL as arguments to essentially avoid having to rewrite this logic over and over again. So let's copy this code snippet, and then inside our code editor, let's navigate to integration.go and let's paste this down here. So let's take a look at everything that we have going on with this function. So we are going to call this one new request, and then this is going to take two different arguments, both a method and also an URL, and both of these arguments are going to be of type string. Then this is going to return both a pointer to http.Request and also a possible error. Now inside of this function, we want to use the HTTP package and call the new request method from this package itself. And here we want to pass first of all the method and then the URL. And then we want to grab the response and the error. We want to check to see if the error is different than nil. If it is different than nil, then we want to return here this pointer as nil. And then we also want to return the error. And at this point, if we don't have any errors, we can successfully return this, which should actually be response, but in this case should be request. And then we can also return the error as nil. Now let's move back to the code snippets, and as it says here, finally let's piece all these things together in a function to get the tags. Later we can use the app interface to get additional data from these apps or other endpoints. So for example, ActiveCampaign or even ConvertKit allows us to store custom fields, or even for example subscribers that we might have inside of the CRM. And if you want to extend the functionality of this project that we are building here, you can go ahead and do that and implement these additional essentially these additional functionalities to be able to get stuff like, again, the custom fields or the list of subscribers. But keep in mind that we now want to focus only on getting the tags from both of these applications. And as it says here, that's the primary reason we use the interface to essentially abstract away all the logic so that we can focus on the logic of the actual integration. So instead of having to repeat over and over again the logic that would allow us, for example, to authenticate a request to a particular app, or for example getting the base path or the path to a particular endpoint, in this case we can abstract all that logic away and simply focus on the business logic that we want to add inside each one of these functions that we would have inside of the project. So for example, we would want to have something like get integration tags, get integration custom fields, get integration subscribers, and so on and so on. So with this in mind, let's copy this code snippet, and then inside of our code editor, let's navigate here again to integration.go, and let's paste this code snippet here. And now let's take a look at everything that we have going on with this function. So as it says here, we want to get the integration tags, then we want to pass an app, so we essentially want to pass an interface into this, or in this case we are going to be passing a struct that implements all of the methods that require that essentially are required by this interface. So we are going to successfully be able to pass both of the structs that we've created, so in this case the ActiveCampaignIntegration and also the ConvertKitIntegration. So we are going to be able to pass both of these structs into this as an argument. Then we want to return a slice of type tag struct and also a possible error. Now inside of this we want to first of all initialize a new request, so we use the function that we've just went ahead and created. Then in this case we want to use the get method, and we pass here the URL by grabbing it here from the interface method. Then after that we want to check to see if the error is different than nil. If not, we want to return this and then also the error. Then after that we are now ready to authenticate this request. So we want to simply use the authenticate method and pass the request into it. Now keep in mind that this is going to be a pointer to http.Request. So we can simply pass this into it and then it is going to modify the value of the request. So we don't need to return anything from this function. And this doesn't error, so we can simply type here app.authenticate and continue running our code. Then after that we want to override the path that we have inside the URL struct. So we want to type here reg then URL and then that path. And then we want to use again this format package and the sprintf method. And we want to pass the following into it. First of all, we want to pass the string, which is going to be the structure of the new string that we want to get back. And in here, we want to essentially pass two different arguments, which are going to be strings. So first of all, we want to pass a string. Then we are going to have this / in between both of them. And after that, we pass another string. So the first one is going to be the path that we already have available to us inside of this URL struct. And then after that, we want to get the path specific to the get tags. So in other words, we want to get the path that is going to allow us to hit the API for a particular application and get the list of tags. So after doing this, we are now ready to make the actual request. So keep in mind that up to this point, we are only modifying the request to be able to send it correctly to the API. So now at this point, we actually want to go ahead and make this request. So we use the HTTP package, then we want to use here the default client, and then we use the do method to send this request. So we pass the request into this method and then we are going to get back the response and also possible error. So we want to handle the error here. Then we want to defer the close of the body. So we want to say here response.body.close and we want to defer that. So this runs after all of the code inside of this function runs. So after the function code stops running, only then we are going to run this, and this is essentially so we are able to read all of the data from the body. And that's the next step that we want to take inside of this function. So we want to use here this io.readAll method, and we want to pass into it the response.body. Now, after passing this, we are going to get this slice of bytes and a possible error. So we want to handle this error down here. And after that, we are ready now to unmarshal the tags. So at this point, we want to essentially transform this slice of bytes that we have available to us that just came from the application's API, and we want to transform into a structure that our application actually understands, and that is essentially the same for each one of the different applications. So we want to use here the unmarshal tags method that we've created, and we want to pass into it the body. Again, we want to pass here a slice of bytes, and we are going to get back the tags and also possible error. Then we want to handle this, and if not, we can return the tags and the error as nil. So as you can see here, these are the return types that we have. So this is a slice of type tag, and then this is going to be the error, which in this case it is going to be nil. And now with all of this done, we are ready to add a route to our web server to return the tags from both of these apps based on the URL we pass. So let's copy this code snippet and then we'll take a look at it. So inside of the code editor, let's navigate to main.go and let's add this after the route where we return this hello world. So as you can see, we want to also use here the get method, and we want to pass the following pattern. So we want to say /tags, and then we want to pass a URL param here, and then we'll be able to grab that by using the she router. So this is going to be app. So we want to pass this inside of curly braces, and then the she router is going to be able to essentially parse this and we'll have access to it inside of this function. So as you can see, you grab here the app, so we say app and then we type here column equals, and then we grab the she package and we use the URL param method, and this method is going to take two different arguments, a pointer to http.Request and then the key that we want to access. And in case this doesn't exist, then this is going to return an empty string, so this method doesn't error in case we don't have a value with this key of app, then this is simply going to return an empty string. But since we've set this here, then we should be able to get this correctly. And now the next step is for us to check if this app is either ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit. Now in the following lesson, we'll go over how to integrate all of this with a database, and we'll also be able to get an application based on the integration ID, but at this point we want to keep this simple and we're simply going to pass here as the app either ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit. So at this point we want to check if the app is either ActiveCampaign or ConvertKit, and in this case if it is ActiveCampaign, then we want to initialize a new ActiveCampaign and then we want to use the method that is going to allow us to get the integration tags. So we say here integration.getIntegrationTags, and we are going to pass this integration into it. And just like I said previously, since this implements all of the methods of the app interface, we are allowed to pass this as a value into this function or into this method. So if we take a look at it here, as you can see, this accepts integration.app and Golang doesn't really complain. But if, for example, we went ahead and we removed, let's say, this method from this struct, and we now navigate here back to the main.go file, as you can see, this now complains, and that's because there's one method that is not being implemented that should be implemented according to the interface. So at this point we wouldn't be allowed to pass this as a value into this function. So let's add this back here and let's save this file. And the next step is for us here inside of this function to check the error. So if the error is different than nil, we simply want to log this error to the console, and then we want to marshal the tags that we get back from this function, and in this case we want to ignore the error, and then after grabbing here this, which is going to be a list of bytes, after we marshal the tags that we get here, and keep in mind that this is going to be of type integration.tag, so this is a slice of that type. So at this point, after we get here the JSON, then we want to write this to the response writer, so this gets sent to the client. And in the case of ConvertKit, we want to do the exact same thing, but for the other application, which is going to be ConvertKit. So we want to initialize the integration, then we want to pass here the get integration tags, we want to pass the struct into it, we want to check for the error, then we want to marshal, and finally we want to write this to the response writer. So now let's go ahead and give this a try to see if all of this is working correctly. But before we go ahead and do that, I'm going to make a slight adjustment to the code inside of the application, and that's because I don't want to expose any data that I have inside both of these accounts. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to comment this line, and then I'm going to change here the tag name from tag.tag to redacted. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing for the ConvertKit app. So down here, instead of having the tag.name, I'm going to comment this line, and then I'm going to change the name to redacted, and that's because I don't want to expose the names of the tags that I have available inside both of these accounts. And now if we navigate here and we clear this and we try now to curl here localhost and then port 8080, and then let's say here tags, and then for example ConvertKit, and we then pipe this into JQ, so this gets printed nicely to the console. We are now able to see here the response that we get back from the ConvertKit's API, and as you can see, we have for each one of the tags inside of the application an ID and then also a name, which in this case is redacted. And then if we do the exact same thing for the ActiveCampaign app, we'll also be able to get the exact same result, but with different data that is coming from a different application. So let's also give this a try, and as you can see, in this case we have different IDs, and we would have here the names of each one of these tags that we are getting from this application. So as you can see, it is pretty simple for us to go ahead and build a third-party integration for a SaaS web application by using a Golang API. So in the next one, we're going to go over how to make this application a little bit more dynamic, and we're going to be integrating with a database. So again, we are able to have multiple integrations with the same application inside of our SaaS web application. And we'll also be able to do cool stuff like be able to determine what the application is based on the integration ID and a lot more stuff.